The moment Isaiah heard his daughter's scream pierce the humid Mississippi night, he understood that love sometimes demands you stand against impossible odds, knowing you might not survive, but standing anyway, because some things matter more than survival. Before we dive into Isaiah's powerful story of courage and sacrifice, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss inspiring stories like this one that honor the extraordinary strength of those who fought to protect what they loved most. The Blackwood Plantation sprawled across northern Mississippi like a kingdom built on suffering, its cotton fields stretching toward horizons that might as well have been prison walls for the 300 souls held in bondage there. In the autumn of 1857, Isaiah was 34 years old, his body carrying the scars of 27 years of enslavement, but his mind remained sharp as any blade ever forged. He was a father to 3 children, Sarah, age 9, Joshua, age 7, and little Grace, just 5 years old. And everything he did, every breath he took, every moment he survived was for them. Isaiah worked as a blacksmith on the plantation, a position that required skill and intelligence that the overseers reluctantly acknowledged even as they refused to see him as fully human. He shaped iron into tools and horseshoes, fixed wagon wheels and farming equipment, and in the process, he learned things. He learned which guards were cruel and which were merely indifferent. He learned the rhythms of the plantation, when attention was focused elsewhere, when opportunities might present themselves. He learned to read the faces of the enslaved children who sometimes watched him work, seeing in their eyes both the weight they already carried and the innocence that slavery tried so hard to steal. "Papa, why do they treat us like this?" Sarah had asked him one evening as they sat outside the quarters, her young face already showing the premature aging that hardship brings to children who should be carefree. Isaiah had pulled her close, choosing his words carefully, because he knew that what he taught his children now would shape how they understood themselves and the world. "Because they're afraid," he'd said, "afraid that if they see us as human, they'll have to face what they're doing. So they tell themselves lies about us being less than them. But baby girl, those lies don't make them true. You are brilliant and beautiful and worthy of every good thing this world has to offer. Don't you ever forget that." But how do you protect your children's sense of self-worth when the entire world around them insists they're property? The trouble started on a Thursday evening when Master Blackwood's nephew, Robert, arrived from Louisiana with his own ideas about how to manage enslaved people. Robert was 23 years old, drunk on power and actual whiskey most hours of the day, and he brought with him 2 guards who shared his particular brand of cruelty. These men, Patterson and Webb, viewed enslaved people not even as valuable property to be maintained, but as objects to be broken for entertainment. Isaiah first became aware of the danger when he noticed how these new guards looked at the children on the plantation, not with the casual disregard of most overseers, but with something darker, more predatory. He saw Patterson watching a group of children playing near the quarters, saw something in the man's expression that made his stomach turn cold with fear. Isaiah began keeping his own children closer, making sure they were never out of sight of trusted adults, never vulnerable to these men who wore authority like a weapon. "Something ain't right with those new guards," Isaiah told his wife Hannah one night as they lay in the darkness of their cabin. "The way they look at the young ones. We got to be extra careful." Hannah's hand found his in the dark, squeezing tight. "I've been feeling it too. That Patterson, he came by the big house kitchen today asking questions about which children work where, who their parents are. Isaiah, I'm scared." Fear was a constant companion in slavery, but this was different. This was the specific, acute terror that comes when you sense immediate danger to those you love most. What could they do when the guards had absolute authority and they had none? Isaiah spent the next several days hypervigilant, his blacksmith work becoming almost automatic as most of his attention focused on tracking his children's whereabouts and safety. He noticed other parents doing the same, noticed a collective tension rippling through the enslaved community as everyone sensed the danger these new guards represented. There were whispered conversations, shared warnings, parents pulling children inside earlier in the evenings. Then came the night when Isaiah's worst fears materialized into nightmare reality. It was past sundown, the September air still heavy with heat, and Isaiah was cleaning his workspace in the blacksmith shop when he heard it. Sarah's scream, high and terrified, coming from the direction of the storage barn near the edge of the quarters. Every parent knows the sound of their child in genuine distress, and that scream sent Isaiah running before his mind even fully processed what he was doing. He burst out of the blacksmith shop and sprinted toward the barn, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his chest. As he got closer, he could hear Sarah crying, could hear a man's voice, Patterson's voice, saying something he couldn't quite make out but whose tone suggested intentions that made Isaiah's blood run cold. He reached the barn and threw open the door without hesitation, without thought for what consequences might follow, because in that moment, nothing mattered except getting to his daughter. The scene inside the barn froze him for just a split second. Patterson had Sarah backed into a corner, his large frame blocking her exit, while Webb stood nearby, watching with a smirk that spoke of complicity. Sarah's dress was torn at the shoulder, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wide with terror. When she saw Isaiah, she screamed again, "Papa!" And Isaiah, who had spent 27 years learning to survive by being careful, by calculating risks, by never directly challenging white authority because that was suicide. Isaiah abandoned every survival strategy he'd ever learned because some things matter more than survival. "Get away from my daughter," he said, his voice low and deadly, every word carrying the weight of a father's protective rage that transcended fear, transcended the power dynamics of slavery, transcended everything except the primal need to protect his child. Patterson turned, surprise registering on his face that an enslaved man would dare speak to him that way, let alone interrupt what he'd clearly planned. "You got some nerve, boy," Patterson said, his hand moving to the whip at his belt. "You best get back to your quarters before you get yourself killed." But Isaiah didn't move except to step further into the barn, placing himself between Patterson and Sarah. "Sarah, come here," he said, not taking his eyes off the guard, and his daughter scrambled around Patterson and ran to him, burying her face against his chest, her whole body shaking. Would Patterson back down, or would Isaiah's protective instinct become his death sentence? Webb moved to block the barn door, and Isaiah realized with absolute clarity that this situation could only end badly. These men couldn't allow an enslaved man to defy them without consequence. It would undermine their authority, contradict the entire system that depended on absolute submission through terror. But Isaiah also knew that if he backed down now, if he let them continue what they'd started, his daughter would carry that trauma forever, and he would have failed in the one responsibility that mattered most. "You got two choices," Patterson said, his hand now on his pistol. "Put that girl back where she was and take your punishment for interrupting, or we can end this right now, and you won't have to worry about nothing ever again." Isaiah felt Sarah's small hands clutching his shirt, felt her whole body pressed against him, seeking safety that he might not be able to provide. His mind raced through possibilities, calculating odds, seeking any path that led to his children's safety. He thought about Joshua and Grace, probably already asleep in the cabin. He thought about Hannah, who would be destroyed if he died tonight. He thought about every enslaved parent who'd faced impossible choices, who'd had to decide between survival and protection, between living to see another day and standing against evil, even when standing meant dying. "I ain't moving," Isaiah said quietly, "and neither is she. You want to shoot me, go ahead. But everyone on this plantation will hear that gunshot, and they'll all know why you did it. You think Master Blackwood is going to be happy about losing his blacksmith because you couldn't control yourself around a 9-year-old child? You think there won't be questions? It was a gamble, invoking the master's economic interest in keeping skilled workers alive, appealing to whatever calculation might override Patterson's rage and wounded pride. For a moment that stretched like eternity. No one moved. Isaiah could hear his own heartbeat, could feel Sarah's rapid breathing, could smell the hay and leather and his own fierce sweat. Everything hinged on whether Patterson valued his position more than his pride. But would logic prevail over a violent man's need to reassert dominance? Isaiah. The voice came from outside the barn. It was Daniel, another enslaved man who worked as a stable hand, and behind him Isaiah could hear more voices, more people approaching. The community had heard the commotion and was gathering, drawn by the knowledge that whatever was happening in that barn affected all of them. Slavery depended on isolation, on handling resistance quietly, on preventing witnesses who might spread stories of defiance. Patterson's face twisted with fury, but Isaiah saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. Shooting an enslaved man in front of dozens of witnesses, especially over circumstances that would be obvious to anyone who looked at Sarah's torn dress and terrified face, would create problems even in a system designed to protect white authority. There would be questions, investigations, potential consequences that might threaten Patterson's position. "This ain't over," Patterson hissed, backing toward the door that Webb now opened from the other side. "Not by a long shot. You just signed your own death warrant, boy." They left, but Isaiah knew the threat was real. He'd crossed a line that enslaved people weren't supposed to cross, and there would be consequences. He held Sarah tight, feeling her sobs gradually subsiding as other people entered the barn. Daniel and Martha, who helped in the big house, and old Joseph, who'd seen 70 years of slavery and whose presence carried weight in the community. "You all right, baby girl?" Martha said, approaching gently and extending her arms. Sarah hesitated, then went to Martha, who wrapped her in a grandmother's embrace. Joseph put a hand on Isaiah's shoulder, his weathered face grave. "You did right," Joseph said quietly. "But you know what's coming. We need to plan." And Isaiah did know. He'd saved his daughter tonight, but he'd also marked himself for retaliation. Patterson and Webb would come for him, maybe not immediately, but soon, and when they did, it wouldn't be a simple whipping or punishment. It would be designed to break him, to make an example, to remind every enslaved person on Blackwood Plantation what happened when you resisted. The question wasn't whether they'd come for him, but when, and whether he could protect all three of his children in the meantime. That night, after Sarah was safely back in their cabin and had finally cried herself to sleep between Isaiah and Hannah, Isaiah lay awake, staring at the darkness and calculating possibilities. He could run, try to escape to the north, but that would mean leaving his family behind to face retaliation. He could try to get his whole family to escape, but with 3 young children, the odds of successfully making it were nearly impossible. He could stay and face whatever punishment came, but that might leave his children without a father, vulnerable to the very predators he'd tried to protect them from. "What are we going to do?" Hannah whispered in the darkness, voicing the question that had been consuming them both. "I don't know yet," Isaiah admitted, "but I won't let them touch our children again. I'd rather die than let that happen." "And if you die, what happens to them then?" Hannah's voice broke. "Isaiah, you did what any father would do, what you had to do. But now we got to think smart, not just brave." She was right, and Isaiah knew it. Courage without strategy was just another way of dying. What he needed was a plan that protected his children both in the immediate moment and in whatever future he could create for them. The enslaved community on Blackwood had networks, knowledge, connections. Perhaps there was a way forward that he couldn't see yet in his exhaustion and fear. The next morning, Isaiah went to work at the blacksmith shop as usual, but word of what had happened had spread through the plantation like wildfire. Other enslaved people found reasons to pass by his workspace. offering quiet words of support, sharing what information they had about Patterson and Webb's movements, building a protective network of awareness around Isaiah's family. "Patterson been asking Master Blackwood for permission to discipline you," Daniel reported around midday, speaking quietly while pretending to examine a horseshoe. "Master told him to wait, that he don't want to lose a skilled blacksmith over nothing important. That's buying you time, but not much. Patterson's fit to be tied." Time. That was what Isaiah needed. Time to plan, time to find a solution, time to ensure his children's safety beyond his own survival. He thought about the Underground Railroad, which he'd heard whispered about for years. He thought about free black communities in the North, about Canada where slavery was illegal. He thought about his children growing up free, able to learn to read, able to choose their own paths, able to live without the constant weight of dehumanization. But how could he get them there when leaving meant abandoning everyone else he loved, everyone he'd grown up with? That afternoon, while Isaiah was working, Master Blackwood himself came to the blacksmith shop, an unusual occurrence that immediately set Isaiah on edge. The master was a man in his 50s whose wealth had been built on his father's and grandfather's exploitation of enslaved labor, and who viewed the people he held in bondage with a mix of paternalistic superiority and economic calculation. "Isaiah," Blackwood said, standing in the doorway and watching as Isaiah shaped hot iron on the anvil. "I understand there was an incident last night." Isaiah set down his hammer, wiped sweat from his face, and turned to face the man who claimed to own him. "Yes, sir," he said carefully, knowing that everything depended on how this conversation went. "My nephew tells a different story than what I've been hearing from others," Blackwood continued. "He says you attacked Patterson without provocation, but the women who work in my house tell me your daughter's dress was torn, that she was terrified. I'm inclined to believe my nephew, but I'm also a practical man. You're a valuable worker, Isaiah. Trained blacksmiths don't grow on trees, so I'm going to ask you directly, what happened?" This was it, a moment where the truth might save him or condemn him, where the arbitrary judgment of a man who viewed him as property would determine his fate. Should Isaiah tell the complete truth or calculate his words to serve survival? Isaiah took a breath and made his choice. "Master Blackwood, Patterson had my 9-year-old daughter cornered in a barn with her dress torn. I got her away from him. That's what happened. A man protects his children, sir. Any man would do the same." He'd appealed to the one principle that even some slaveholders publicly claimed to respect: fatherhood, family, protection of children, even though the system they maintained systematically denied enslaved people those very rights. It was a calculated risk, testing whether Blackwood's economic interest in keeping a skilled blacksmith would override his nephew's pride. Blackwood was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. "You understand that you defied white authority," he finally said. "That can't go unpunished. But I also understand that Patterson and Webb are enthusiastic in their methods. Here's what's going to happen. You'll receive 10 lashes tomorrow at dawn in front of the community. That satisfies the requirement for punishment. And Patterson and Webb will be reassigned to field supervision, away from the quarters. My nephew won't be happy, but I run this plantation on profit, not on his preferences. Do we have an understanding? 10 lashes. It would be brutal, agonizing, potentially scarring, but it was survivable. More importantly, it moved Patterson away from the children. Isaiah nodded. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." The words tasted like ash, thanking someone for mercy within a system designed to be merciless. But survival sometimes required swallowing pride and dignity in favor of strategy. Blackwood turned to leave, then paused. "Isaiah, you're a father. I respect that. But you're also my property, and if you ever defy white authority again, I won't be able to protect you. Remember that." After he left, Isaiah sagged against the anvil, the weight of what was coming settling over him. 10 lashes. He'd seen men receive that punishment before, knew the kind of pain it involved, knew how long it took to heal. But he'd also saved his daughter and secured a measure of safety for the other children. In the mathematics of slavery, that counted as a victory, even if it didn't feel like one. That evening, Isaiah gathered Sarah, Joshua, and Grace close and talked to them about what would happen in the morning. "I need you to understand something," he said, holding each of their small hands. "Tomorrow, they're going to hurt me because I protected your sister, and I want you to know that I would do it again, 1,000 times over. What's going to happen to me doesn't mean I was wrong. It means the system is wrong. But we're going to survive it together, and someday, maybe not soon, but someday, you're going to be free. And when you are, I want you to remember that your daddy loved you enough to stand between you and anyone who would hurt you, no matter what it cost him." Sarah started crying. "I don't want them to hurt you, Papa. It's my fault. I don't." Isaiah pulled her close. "No, baby girl, this ain't your fault. None of this is. You didn't do anything wrong. The men who tried to hurt you did wrong. The system that lets them do it is wrong. But you are perfect and precious, and don't you ever think different." Hannah held their younger children, tears streaming down her face, and that night the family lay together in their small cabin, holding on to each other like shipwreck survivors, clinging to floating debris in a storm. Dawn came too quickly, bringing with it the sound of the bell summoning everyone to witness Isaiah's punishment. This was part of slavery's theater, public punishment designed not just to hurt the individual, but to terrorize the entire community, to remind everyone what happened when you resisted. Isaiah walked to the whipping post with his head high, refusing to show the fear that churned in his gut. Hannah kept the children inside the cabin, sparing them the sight. Though Isaiah knew they would hear it, everyone would hear it. The first lash tore through his shirt and into his back, pain exploding like lightning through his body. Isaiah clenched his jaw, refusing to scream, because his children were listening and he wanted them to hear strength, not breaking. The second lash crossed the first, and he felt blood begin to flow. By the fifth lash, his knees wanted to buckle, but he locked them, held himself upright through pure will. By the eighth, his vision was graying at the edges, his body screaming for mercy that wouldn't come. The 10th lash finally came, and Isaiah was cut down from the post, other enslaved men catching him as he nearly collapsed. They carried him back to his cabin, laid him carefully on his stomach while Hannah began the work of cleaning and dressing the wounds with what limited supplies they had. Water and cloth and prayers. For 3 days, Isaiah lay on his stomach in that cabin, his back a map of agony, fever coming and going as his body fought infection. Hannah tended him constantly, and the children took turns sitting with him, their small hands carefully holding his when the pain got too bad. Other community members brought food, shared medicine made from roots and herbs, offered support that was both practical and spiritual. "You showed them we're not broken," old Joseph said, sitting beside Isaiah's pallet on the second day. "Every person on this plantation saw you stand up for your child, saw you take your punishment without begging, without breaking. That matters more than you know. It reminds all of us that we're human, that we have dignity they can't take away no matter what they do to our bodies." But Isaiah wondered what kind of victory this was when his back was shredded and his children had listened to their father being beaten. What kind of dignity could exist within slavery's confines? On the 4th day, Isaiah was able to stand, though his back still screamed with every movement. He returned to the blacksmith shop, working slowly, carefully, his hands still steady despite his body's pain. And he noticed something. Patterson and Webb were indeed reassigned to the far fields, away from the quarters, their access to the children effectively cut off. Other parents thanked him quietly, expressing gratitude mixed with grief that such a sacrifice had been necessary. In the weeks that followed, As Isaiah's back slowly healed and the whip marks faded into scars he would carry forever, he began working on something else, a plan for his children's future that went beyond mere survival. He connected with others in the community who knew about the Underground Railroad, who had information about routes north, who understood the networks that existed to help people escape. He couldn't leave, not yet, maybe not ever. But he began preparing his children for the possibility, teaching them skills they would need, planting seeds of knowledge about which stars to follow, which houses displayed certain signals, which words to say if they ever found themselves seeking help. "Why are you teaching us this, Papa?" Joshua asked one evening as Isaiah showed him how to navigate by the North Star. "Because knowledge is freedom," Isaiah said. "They can chain your body, but they can't chain your mind unless you let them. And I'm teaching you so that when opportunity comes, and it will come, son, maybe not today or tomorrow, but it will come, you'll be ready to take it." But the opportunity came sooner and more unexpectedly than Isaiah could have imagined. 6 months after the barn incident, in the spring of 1858, word spread through the plantation's underground network that a conductor on the Underground Railroad would be passing through the area, offering to take a small group north. There was space for 3 children and 1 adult. Isaiah faced an impossible choice. He could send Hannah with the children, keeping himself behind to avoid suspicion and potential pursuit. Or he could go himself, taking the children but leaving Hannah. Or they could stay together and keep waiting for an opportunity that might accommodate the whole family. "You have to take them," Hannah said when they discussed it in the darkness of their cabin, their voices barely whispers. "If you go, you can protect them on the journey. If I go, I'm a woman traveling alone with 3 children. That raises more suspicion, makes us more vulnerable. This is your chance to get them to freedom, Isaiah. You have to take it." "I can't leave you," Isaiah said, his voice breaking. "Hannah, we've been together 16 years. You're my heart. How can I leave you behind?" Hannah took his face in her hands. "You're taking my heart with you. Our babies. You're taking them to freedom. That's how you show me love, not by staying here where we're all in chains. Get them north, get them safe, make a life, and someday, when it's possible, come back for me. But right now, this moment, this choice, you know what has to be done." It was the hardest decision Isaiah had ever faced, harder even than standing up to Patterson in that barn, because that had been instinct. But this required choosing between 2 kinds of love, spousal and parental, with no option that didn't involve tearing apart his heart. In the end, love for his children won, because Hannah was right. They deserved freedom, deserved a chance to grow up as full human beings, deserved to live without the daily dehumanization of slavery. 2 weeks later, on a moonless night in April, Isaiah and his 3 children slipped away from Blackwood Plantation, guided by a free black man named Jacob, who worked as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. The journey north took 6 weeks of terror and hope, mixed in equal measure. They traveled by night, hid in root cellars and false-bottomed wagons during the day, relied on the kindness and courage of both black and white abolitionists who risked their own safety to help fugitives reach freedom. Isaiah carried Grace when she was too tired to walk, told stories to distract the children from their fear and hunger, taught them to be silent when necessary and brave when required. There were close calls, patrollers who came within feet of their hiding place, a river crossing that nearly swept Joshua away. Nights so cold that Isaiah wrapped his own coat around his children and shivered through until dawn. But there were also moments of profound humanity. The Quaker family, who fed them a hot meal and let them sleep in real beds for one night. The free black community in Maryland that gave them clothes and supplies. The white minister who falsified papers identifying them as his servants traveling north. And finally, in late May of 1858, they crossed into Pennsylvania, into free territory where slavery had no legal standing. Isaiah stood on free soil with his 3 children, and for the first time in his life, He was not someone else's property. The weight of that realization nearly brought him to his knees, not freedom as some abstract concept, but actual legal recognition of his humanity, his right to exist as a person, rather than property. They settled in Philadelphia, where Isaiah found work as a blacksmith. Real work with real wages that he earned and kept. He rented a small house, nothing fancy but their own space that no one could enter without permission. He enrolled Sarah, Joshua, and Grace in a school for black children, watching with tears in his eyes as they learned to read, to write, to calculate numbers on paper. Every evening, when they came home and told him what they'd learned, Isaiah felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he'd known. The satisfaction of seeing his children access knowledge, develop their minds, become the fully realized human beings they'd always been, but that slavery had tried to prevent them from becoming. But freedom was complicated by the shadow of what and who he'd left behind. Hannah remained enslaved at Blackwood, and every day Isaiah woke in freedom, he felt the guilt of it, felt the incompleteness of liberation that divided families. He began saving money, planning for the day when he could either buy her freedom or fund another rescue operation. He connected with abolitionist organizations, told his story at meetings, used his experience to help others who escaped along the railroad. 3 years later, in 1861, when the Civil War began and the possibility of slavery's end became tangible, Isaiah joined the effort with everything he had. He couldn't fight, he was too old for the army, but he could forge, could make tools and weapons, could support the war effort that might finally break the chains of everyone still held in bondage. And when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, when slavery was legally abolished in Confederate states, Isaiah made the dangerous journey back south to find Hannah. He found her still at Blackwood Plantation, aged by the years of separation but unbroken, her spirit intact despite everything. They reunited in tears and joy, and this time when Isaiah traveled north, it was with his whole family, with the woman he loved beside him, all of them finally free, not because someone granted it, but because the war and the courage of millions of enslaved people who'd resisted and escaped and fought had made freedom inevitable. In Philadelphia, the reunited family built a life that was both ordinary and miraculous. Isaiah continued his blacksmith work. Hannah found employment as a seamstress. The children grew, attended school, developed skills and dreams that slavery would never have allowed. Sarah became a teacher, Joshua a carpenter, Grace a midwife. They married, had children of their own, built communities and legacies. And Isaiah, in his later years, would sit with his grandchildren and tell them stories. Not just about the dramatic moments like confronting Patterson in the barn or escaping to freedom, but about the daily acts of resistance and humanity that enslaved people performed. He told them about the intelligence required to survive, the strategic thinking that went into every decision, the mental and spiritual strength that kept people human in a system designed to dehumanize. Your ancestors were not slaves, he would tell them, echoing Maria's wisdom from another story, another journey. They were people who were enslaved. There's a profound difference. Slavery was a condition imposed on them by violence and law, but it was never their identity. They were fathers and mothers, thinkers and dreamers, strategists and survivors. They were human beings who maintained their humanity despite everything designed to strip it away. And the proof of their success is you. You exist, you're free, you're educated, you're building lives of dignity and purpose. That's their victory, that's their legacy. When Isaiah died in 1889 at the age of 66, he was surrounded by 3 generations of family, children, grandchildren, and even 2 great-grandchildren. His funeral was attended by hundreds. People he'd worked with, abolitionists he'd collaborated with, community members whose lives he'd touched through decades of quiet leadership and example. They buried him in a cemetery in Philadelphia, his headstone reading, Isaiah, born enslaved, died free, stood between his children and harm, and taught us all what love looks like. But his legacy was more than words on stone. It was in the lives he'd saved and shaped, in the example he'd set of courage that wasn't reckless but calculated, of love that was both fierce and strategic. It was in the story he'd lived about fatherhood, meaning protection, even at the cost of personal safety, about intelligence and planning, creating paths to freedom, about the human spirit refusing to be broken no matter what pressures were applied to it. Isaiah's story reminds us that heroism under slavery often looked different from the dramatic narratives we sometimes imagine. It was in the daily decision to maintain dignity, to protect children, to resist in ways both large and small. It was in the intelligence to calculate risks and seize opportunities, in the courage to stand against violence even knowing the cost, in the love that prioritized children's freedom over personal comfort or even survival. And perhaps most importantly, his story reminds us that enslaved people were not passive victims waiting for liberation, but active agents of their own freedom and their families' futures. They were strategists who used every tool available: intelligence, courage, community networks, knowledge of terrain and timing. They were fully human people engaged in the most human of pursuits, protecting those they loved, seeking freedom for themselves and their children, resisting oppression in whatever ways were available to them. The moment Isaiah heard his daughter's scream and ran toward danger instead of away from it, he was asserting something fundamental about humanity that slavery tried to deny, that love transcends survival instinct, that fatherhood means protection regardless of cost, that some stands must be taken even when the odds are impossible. That moment in the barn, when he placed himself between Patterson and Sarah, was not just about one father and one daughter, but about the human capacity for courage, for sacrifice, for resistance against evil. And in the end, that's what we must remember. Isaiah's story, like the stories of millions who survived and resisted slavery, is not ultimately about oppression, but about human resilience. Not about victimhood, but about agency. Not about being property, but about being people who never stopped asserting their humanity, no matter what the law claimed. Freedom, Isaiah taught his descendants, is both an external condition and an internal state. Legal freedom matters profoundly. It determines what's possible, what's safe, what rights are recognized. But spiritual and psychological freedom, the freedom of knowing your own worth and refusing to internalize oppression's lies, that freedom exists regardless of legal status. Enslaved people maintained that internal freedom through culture and family and community and resistance, through the daily choice to see themselves as fully human even when surrounded by dehumanization. Isaiah stood between his children and harm because that's what fathers do, because love demands courage, because some things matter more than survival. And in doing so, he didn't just save Sarah in that barn, he saved all three of his children from growing up internalizing that the world could violate them with impunity. He taught them that they were worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth any sacrifice. He taught them, through action more powerful than words, that they were fully human and deserving of dignity and safety. That lesson echoed through generations, through the children and grandchildren who built lives in freedom, who carried forward the legacy of resistance and resilience, who never forgot where they came from or what their ancestors endured and overcame. That lesson echoes still, reminding us that every person denied freedom fought for it in whatever ways they could, that every parent tried to protect their children from a system designed to harm them, that every act of resistance, large or small, successful or not, was an assertion of humanity against dehumanization. Isaiah's scarred back was a testament to the cruelty of slavery, but his life was a testament to something stronger, the unbreakable human spirit, the power of love to transcend fear, the capacity of oppressed people to strategize and resist and ultimately overcome. He faced farm guards to save his children, and in that facing, he saved not just them, but something essential about human dignity itself. The principle that some stands must be taken, that some love cannot be compromised, that some humanity cannot be destroyed no matter how brutally it's attacked. This is the story we remember, the legacy we honor, not of victims, but of victors over impossible odds, not of property, but of people who never stopped being people, not of the broken, but of those who refused to break. Isaiah and millions like him taught us that freedom is worth any price, that children are worth any sacrifice, that human dignity cannot be legislated away even when human rights are denied. And they taught us, finally, that we carry their courage forward, that we honor them not through pity, but through recognition of their full humanity, their extraordinary intelligence and strategic brilliance, their unbreakable love and commitment to family and community and freedom. Isaiah heard his daughter scream and ran toward danger because that's what love looks like when it's tested by fire. And in that running, he ran not just for Sarah but for all of us, showing us what it means to be fully human in the face of systems designed to deny humanity. What it means to be a father when fatherhood itself is under attack. What it means to stand when everything tells you to bow. His legacy lives in every person who refuses to accept dehumanization, who protects those vulnerable to violence, who stands against oppression regardless of cost. His legacy lives in freedom itself, in the truth that it was not given but taken, not granted but seized, not a gift from the powerful but a right claimed by those who'd been denied it. Isaiah stood, and in standing, he taught us all how to stand. That is a legacy that will never die.